Hello.
We are live now.
Hello, good morning, friends, and welcome once again to this web-enabled meeting of Baroda Book Browsers. I hope all of you and your families are taking enough care to stay safe in this ongoing corona pandemic. We have today's book, Has China Won? The title is, of course, like a newspaper headline, very catchy. But the underlying theme of the book, the subtext, conveys the real contents of the book that the author, has taken upon in narratives and various rationales. That is China's challenge to America's primacy. Primacy means superpower in the world order. The book is written by Kishore Mehbubani. About him, I will leave it to the reviewer, Professor Dholakia, to apprise the members as he takes up the review in few minutes from now. But let me brief you about Professor Dholakia, our today's reviewer. Professor Dholakia is a political science professor at MS University of Vadodara, and he was also a provost of GSFC University earlier. He is a very well-known figure in this part of India as a political science expert, has written 2 books already, published numerous articles, and he is a frequent invitee as a speaker to various international symposium in countries like US, Germany, and Europe. He is a very regular contributor to Baroda Book Browser as a reviewer. He has already reviewed 2 books earlier. The first one was Hindus, and second one was the book called Battle Half Won. So that is about Professor Dholakia. Allow me a few minutes to set the tone for today's book review. And before I hand over to Professor Dholakia, let me say, what do we mean by supremacy or primacy or dominance of a nation? In pure and simple terms, when a particular nation has a consistent ability over a particular period of time to dominate in a way that it substantially and significantly influences the other countries or major part of the world's decisions on economy, polity, and security, and at times ability to effect regime change in other nations, and also veto certain things that matter in certain spheres. That's called the dominance or supremacy. Now, if you look at the post-World War II scenario, that role has unquestionably been assumed by USA. Of course, for a large part of the 20th century, though it was the most dominant force in the world, but it also has had USSR to contend with in certain parts of the world, and therefore, you can say that world was bipolar to that extent. The superpower and Cold War era, as it is popularly known, continued for 40 years after Second World War.
Just a moment.
And it ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1990. But let me tell you one important thing or feature about that particular Cold War was that, that particular era of battle for supremacy or bipolar world was on ideological ground, by and large. The form of governance in USA and Western allies was for the democratic order plus capitalism and market-oriented economies. Whereas in the bloc of nations under USSR influence, it was primarily driven by communism and central planning concept while managing the economy. And by and large, along these lines, in those 40 years, the nations were divided and their polity, their culture, their security decisions and economy were, influenced by, these dominant philosophies. But after 1990, collapse of USSR, for a certain period, right up to, let's say, till as we talk now, America has become the sole superpower, unquestionably. And America's influence in last 30 years in various parts of the world has also resulted in disenchantment in certain parts of the world because of the horrific consequences which have arisen because of its interventions and regime change in Middle East and Afghanistan and things like that. So I won't say that exactly a vacuum has arisen because of this disenchantment, but there is some space created for an alternate feeling about, at least a multipolar world, if not, the bipolar world. Now, along these things, in recent years, China has emerged as a very, very dominant economic power. If I give you some statistics of how China has burgeoned and come to dominate the economic sphere of the world, this is truly astonishing. It is something like of which never has happened before in the world. In 1980, when China really began the reform with the visionary, and in my opinion, probably, if not the most important leader of 20th century, among certainly top 5 leaders of the 20th century, that Deng Xiaoping. And after that, for 30 relentless years, China has progressed and come to the scene of economy, which is truly, truly gargantuan. In 1980, China's economy was, in terms of GDP, real terms, 10% of the size of the USA. Just remember, 10%. Today, in 2019, China's GDP size is 2/3, almost 67% of what US's GDP is. And if you take the current year and the year after this, when China's growth would be relatively higher than that of USA, it could be even 75%. But be that as it may, but in 2015, if you take the size of the GDP based on current cost or current purchasing power, then China has already overtaken USA. Now, this is a very significant landmark happening, which has happened in 2015. Secondly, now in the 21st century, the world scape has changed. It is no longer the physical wars that would shape the events of the future in world, but the technology, the digital technology, science and technology field. China has made very impressive strides in digital technology, science, and it is a very, very important power. Why it is going to put challenges to China? Why it is going to put challenges to USA? can be gleaned from, this some statistics. Out of some 20 most valuable technology-driven companies in the world, 11 are US and 9 are Chinese. So that gives you a size and scale of China's eminence. Anyway, this is the background that I wanted to give you. And before I hand over to Professor Dholakia, with a request to carry out the review of what the author has to say and what kind of signals the author is flagging to give this very catchy title, Has China Won? And what kind of strategies, what kind of precautions, what kind of major changes that world will have to brace with in the years to come, not decades, in the very few next years to come. All of that have been encapsulated in this book. And may I now request Professor Dholakia, please to take over and carry out his presentation. Over to Professor Dholakia.
Thank you very much, Sunil Bhai. And a very good Sunday morning to all the participants, ladies and gentlemen. I am thankful to Sunil Bhai, as always, for this invitation to present the review of the book Has China Won? The Chinese Challenge to American Primacy, written by Kishore Mahbubani. It's a pleasure to be even a listener in BBB events, and it's always a greater pleasure to be a speaker in the BBB events, because the perspicacity of Sunil Bhai has ensured that only the high quality books and competent reviewers are presented before an august audience consisting of intellectually stimulated minds in the city of Vadodara and outside. So it's a delight, Sunil Bhai, to be part of this Sunday morning program for the month of July 2020. And I look forward to stimulating discussion with the elite gathering today. The book, the title is already conveyed to you. Now, a few lines about the author, Kishore Mahbubani. He is not an Indian, but an Indian origin Singaporean who has strong cultural links with India, who also has strong cultural loyalties with India, as he has admitted time and again. He spent his career in Singapore's foreign service. He is a career diplomat, spent more than 3 decades in Singapore's foreign service, rose to the position of Singapore's permanent representative to the United Nations for nearly a decade. He even acted as chairperson of the UN Security Council for a couple of years when Singapore became member of the Security Council, and has wide-ranging experience of carrying out diplomacy, not just at the United Nations, but also in major countries around the world on behalf of his government, that is Singapore government. After retirement, he chose to turn an academic, and he has been a prolific author post-retirement, writing books mainly concerning the strategic issues, international issues, foreign policy issues, and also some educational issues. His most important academic contribution has been as the Dean of the Lee Kuan School of Public Policy at the Singapore National University. As we all know, this is one of the most distinguished think tanks in Asia, which is engaged with issues concerning economic, strategic, security, political, and technological nature, and has come out with a lot of important studies and ideas, policy briefs, and has also collected a community of outstanding academics under its umbrella. So this book is the latest, actually. It is almost oven fresh, published sometime in March, April 2020. And still, if you go to the Google or YouTube, you will find that it is being hotly discussed, reviewed by a variety of scholars. Mostly in the Western world, it has not received very rave reviews, not because of the quality of the book, but because of what it says. And as we go along, we would understand that why Americans are not too happy about the contents, about the kind of ideas that Mehbubani has presented in this book. This is not the only book on China as we know. I mean, Sinology has been a very thriving field over the last 2 decades. Several scholars, journalists, diplomats, and even politicians have come out with their own interpretations on rise of China as a great power, the various dimensions of the Chinese power, the economic, military, political aspects of the Chinese power, including the soft power, as well as several of them have also written about the historical, internal, political aspects of China. And this particular book should be and promises to be one of the important additions to this growing body of literature on understanding China and also understanding China's international relationships with other great or regional powers, including India. This is also a timely book, I would say, because China is much maligned after the spread of COVID-19 as a probable designer of this virus. Nobody knows the truth, but it is a fact that large number of countries and peoples around the world feel that this is not a natural biological virus, but something that may have been artificially created either through intellectual theft or through original research under Chinese tutelage and meant to really cripple the global economy and give an advantage to the Chinese plans to dominate the world. So it is timely, and it is most timely because we have been witnessing for the last 2-3 days severe, and I would say even historical developments emanating from the United States concerning China, including the closure of Chinese consulates in Houston and possibly even in San Francisco. And that follows the earlier sanctions on trade-related sanctions on China that were imposed by by the Trump administration. So, I mean, China is now very much in the headlines on the front pages of the newspapers of the Western world and also part of the public debate everywhere. And in this context, I think this book should be a compelling read for anybody who is interested in understanding China as a great power and particularly understanding China's future relationship with the United States, the number one superpower today. As we can make out from the title, and the title is, let me admit, slightly melodramatic and exaggerated. Possibly, I think this could have been suggested by the publisher to make the book more saleable because it's not really about victory and defeat of either US or China. It is basically a somber analysis of the power resources and the strategies that have been followed by United States and China over the last 3 decades. And it's also a book which projects the future scenario based on the analysis of the strategies and the power resources of both the countries over the last 3 decades. And it its background is basically the developing geopolitical contest between US and China. I mean, this book has no other objective. It only wants to grapple with the emerging geopolitical, strategic, geo-economic competition between United States and China. And this is not an unnatural development. This has been anticipated by the observers of the global affairs during the last 3 decades, and somehow it is inbuilt into the nature of the international system. When one great power declines and another emerges, it is natural for such power rivalries to come to the fore and unfold in sometimes unpredictable dimensions. So, what does the book do, or what does the author do? And Mehbubani begins with right kind of questions. In fact, he has written a few paragraphs stating the importance of asking the right questions. He says that the most important part of a good writing or a good strategic plan is to ask the right sort of questions. More than getting the right kind of answers, it is important to get the mind to formulate the right kind of questions. And he mentions three of his geopolitical gurus: Lee Kuan Yew himself, the founder of the Singaporean state, then Go Sui, the geopolitical strategist of Singapore, and S. Rajaratnam. And he says that how these three strategic minds mentored him to raise the right kind of questions so that a strategic plan of a nation or even of an organization turns out to be cogent and effective. So he says that while we formulate questions, when we think about a strategic plan, we must not think about the possible, we must also think about the impossible. Any good strategic plan must actually integrate a thinking about the impossibles and the imponderables also. And it is these impossible questions that he wants to raise. Not all questions that are impossible, but there are also some questions in the book which talks about the unthinkable, the impossible futures that may arise over the next decades to come. Well, Mehbubani has said that this book is basically trying to address 10 important questions concerning US China strategic, political, economic relationship. And let me go through these 10 questions so that the book is properly contextualized and the further arguments can be understood and grappled with suitably. First question he asks is, can America's GDP become smaller than China's in the next 3 decades? And if so, that is, if America's GDP becomes smaller than China's, what type of adjustments domestically and globally United States would have to make? Sunil Bhai some time back referred to some of the GDP figures, and as the gap is closing, it is not unlikely that China may surpass United States in terms of the size of its GDP and the economy. So first question concerns the economic gap between United States and China and the likelihood of China surpassing the United States GDP and the overall size of economy and several other parameters that are attached with the size of the GDP. Second question that Mehbubani asks is, should America's goal at this juncture be to improve the livelihood of its own 330 million people, or should it invest more resources on preserving its supremacy as number one country in the world? Mehbubani says that now a contradiction has developed between these two propositions. If America wants to do welfare for its people, it will have to reduce its commitment to the status as superpower or hyperpower. Or conversely, if it wants to remain a superpower, it will have to displease its population in terms of investment on socio-economic welfare of its population. Third question, is America's heavy defense expenditure justified in current era or not? Mehbubani says that during the Cold War, this was probably the right strategy. The heavy expenditure that America made on defense was the right strategy. Because US wanted Soviet Union to respond to this expenditure, and Soviet economy was very weak. So America expected that more America spends on defense, more Soviet Union will be compelled to follow suit, and more the Soviet Union spends on defense, weaker will be its economy, and overall the country ability to sustain would weaken. And somehow this strategy paid off. One of the key reasons for the disintegration of the Soviet Union was absolutely terrible shape that its economy went into due to excessive expenditure on defense and military related expeditions abroad by the Soviet Union. But is this strategy justified now when America itself is facing many challenges? And secondly, when China is not actually responding in the same way that Soviet Union did. China is not actually responding to United States gun by gun, ship by ship, aircraft by aircraft, bomb by bomb nature. China says that fine, you go ahead with the development of your military arsenal, and we will go along at our own pace. We are not engaged in an arms race with United States. So the third question that Mehbubani asked is this: that if since China is not engaged in an arms race with the United States, is US justified in investing heavy resources in its defense even now when the Cold War is won and there is no immediate next major military power there to challenge it? A fourth question that Mehbubani raises is this, and that is about the allies and the alliance. Mehbubani says that America could win the Cold War, America could emerge as a superpower largely because of its ability to form alliances and invest in the partnerships with various countries at a bilateral level or in the form of regional tie-ups and alliances that it made. And it is this investment in the form of aid, in the form of foreign direct investment, in the form of military assistance or economic assistance to allies that actually help the United States expand its legitimacy as a superpower and finally succeed in eliminating the biggest threat that it faced during the Cold War, and that is the USSR. Now, the question that Mehbubani raises is this: that is US ability to form alliances and to maintain its allies, is it intact or has it weakened after the Cold War? Obviously, Mehbubani seems to believe that America today has less allies than it had during the Cold War, less reliable allies. It has its allies, but all the allies may not go along with the United States when it comes to conduct of some of its foreign policy expeditions and objectives. Fifth question that Mehbubani raises is this, that US has in recent times weaponized its dollar. It has been using dollar to weaken what it feels are the economies of its adversaries like Iran and earlier Libya and North Korea and so on. Now Mehbubani asks that dollar is actually the most powerful source of America's dominance and power, and if America weaponizes dollar, the nodal currency of global exchanges, and if China decides to join in this battle of currencies and decides to take its own steps to weaken the dollar and pierce the foreign currency market globally, what could be the consequence of this? Mehbubani is asking that is it the right foreign policy strategy to use dollar as a strategic weapon to fight against the adversaries, as the Trump administration seems to be doing now over the last few years? Sixth question that Mehbubani raises is this, that it was vital for America during the Cold War, and it is vital even now, to have stable, vibrant, satisfied domestic society. Mehbubani quotes George Kennan, the chief strategist of the Cold War, who explicitly advised the American foreign policy makers to ensure that domestic stability, prosperity, and overall level of well-being in United States remains intact. Then and then only US is able to carry out its strategic objectives outside the borders. Now Mehbubani asks that is the situation same now? Is the American population happy, satisfied, and contented with respect to its own government and its working and its policies, or America is facing a slow decline of the legitimacy of its own regimes with respect to American population? And what would it impact? What would be its impact on the ongoing rivalry with the China? Seventh question that Mehbubani raises is this: should or is America justified in projecting its competition with China in ideological terms, the same way that it did with Soviet Union? That it's a conflict between democracy and authoritarianism. It's a conflict between freedom and suppression. Mehbubani asked that is this the right strategy and the right way of understanding US-China rivalry today? Eighth question that he raises is this, that, and he says that in any strategic competition, in any strategic rivalry, emotional or irrational responses are likely to lead to the weakening and possibly the ultimate decline of the actor, which is using the irrational or emotional response. Strategy is a matter of cool-headed, quiet, steady thinking and implementation of the various strategic options over a period of years and decades. Now, Mehbubani seems to believe that America has fallen into the trap of knee-jerk, emotional or irrational responses when it comes to reacting to China. And I think when we look at the developments of the last few months from the White House, we do find that possibly Mehbubani's assumption that America is slowly becoming a victim of knee-jerk reactions rather than well thought out and cool-headed strategic responses is possibly right. Ninth question that Mehbubani raises in this book is, does America know China well? Does America know China enough? And he cites Sun Tzu, one of China's greatest strategic thinkers, to drive home this particular point. Sun Tzu had written that if a power knows itself and also knows its enemy, it doesn't have to worry about anything for 100 years. If a power knows itself but it doesn't know its enemy, then the chance of victory is 50%, and the 50% chance of victory is also with the adversary. And if a power doesn't know itself as well as its adversary, defeat is certain. Now, Mehbubani is not suggesting that America falls into the last category, where its defeat would be certain because America neither knows itself nor its enemy. But definitely, Mehbubani seems to believe that America belongs to the second category, where America possibly knows itself, but it doesn't have full understanding and appreciation of what China is like, civilizationally, politically, philosophically, strategically. And the 10th question that Mehbubani raises and addresses in this particular book concerns the nature of the strategy that China and US both are following. Mehbubani seems to argue that China is following the strategy of slow and steady growth of power. China is not involved in any kind of off the cuff, hurried, unpredictable kind of actions. It's playing a game of chess, which is typically Chinese. Against that, America seems to be following a very rapid action kind of a strategy. So, how these two different types of strategies, the rapid action strategy of United States and slow and steady and non-reactive strategy of the China, how these two would actually interact with each other is one question that Mehbubani is trying to address. So the book is actually structured around an analysis of these 10 key questions and these 10 key themes surrounding Sino-US relations. It is actually going to be a disappointment for Sinophiles if they feel that the book is about China. Let me convey to you that the principal theme of the book, the hero of this book is not China, it is United States. The book is actually written to tell the United States what is wrong with its policy and how it can reform and reorient its strategic policy with respect to China. It is actually a book which gives free advice to the Department of State, to the White House, about how America can reformulate its China policy and what is fundamentally wrong with its existing approach and policy orientation to China. But before Mehbubani goes into criticism of America and its present strategic policy with respect to China, he does have a few words of praise for US, and let me go through some of the points that Mehbubani mentions, which substantiate the greatness of America as a nation. Mehbubani says that America has always thrived during the times of chaos. America is one country which actually makes the best use of chaos rather than order. And there is a hope that the present strategic chaos in which America is placed, possibly American leadership and American people, might come up with a response that would help it come out of this chaotic situation and bring about a new global order as per its design. Secondly, Mehbubani says that America's great strength lies in the fact that it gives access. It's open to the best and the brightest minds in this world. And that is what has made America great. I mean, as a country of immigrants, which wants to attract the best talent from everywhere, and which also wants to nurture and recognize this talent through various types of reward mechanisms and granting them various positions in the decision making and the policy making body. Third merit of America, according to Mehboob, is its strong institutions, democratic institutions, political institutions. Fourthly, Mehboob says that America's universities are its great assets. American universities attract the best, including the Chinese. And as long as American universities retain their excellence in terms of teaching, research, and all other outputs that a university is expected to give, possibly there is hope for United States to overcome this challenge from China. And lastly, he says that America's another great asset is the fact that it remains committed to the overall ethos of Western civilization. So America itself doesn't have a civilization, but it does identify itself with the ethos of the Western civilization. Now, after this initial sugarcoating of the bitter pill that Mehboob then administers to United States, he comes to the next set of his arguments. And the most important conclusion that he draws from this is that America's policy, strategic policy, foreign policy with respect to China is today terribly blundered, absolutely misconceived, and detrimental to America's long-term interests. He feels that America is falling into the same trap that most great powers are likely to fall. And that is the trap of assuming that we are invincible and there is nobody who can upstage us from our position as number one country. So he advises the Americans that think of the worst scenario. What would happen if America becomes not number one, but number two or number three country in the world after 2 or 3 decades? And are you ready to fight, to address, to meet that particular kind of a scenario? Are you ready with a plan for your economy, for your military, for your international relationships, which can meet this prospect of America vacating number one place for China after 2 or 3 decades, not so much out of its own will, but because of the success of Chinese strategies and Chinese policies. In fact, Mehboob says that America has handed over the first win to China by its misconceived and blundered policies. And particularly he cites Trump here, that single-handedly Trump has done most to help China than any previous president by embarking on this very hardline, hawkish policy measures against China. And he says that China's best bet in White House is actually Trump. China would be happy if Trump gets a second term because that would further strengthen China, make it more powerful and weaken America further and close the gap between the two countries. So Mehboob is holding a mirror to American policymakers and telling them that all is not well with you and look at your policies more critically. He also says that America today has no long-term plan, no long-term strategic plan with respect to how it wants to deal with the emerging world, not just with respect to China, but with respect to any other aspect. I mean, in WTO, it is clear America doesn't know, I mean, what it wants to do with WTO. America doesn't know what it wants to do in the Middle East. It doesn't know what it wants to do with North Korea. And it doesn't even know what it wants to do with India because someday it threatens sanctions against India and another day it offers assistance to India. So Mehboob says that America today suffers from a great policy confusion with respect to China in particular and larger long-term plan with respect to global affairs in general. He also says that America's biggest problem today is its divided domestic society. You can remain a great power provided your internal divisions are cemented. But unfortunately, Trump has actually opened up all the divides within American society between the blacks and the whites, between the Muslims and the non Muslims, between the whites and the other colored people, between the immigrants and the local long settled Americans, and so on and so forth. So he feels that this divisive character of American policies uh, is likely to actually weaken America further in its competition with China. Mehbubani says that in contrast to this, China projects the image of stability and predictability. America is very unpredictable. You don't know what Trump is going to do tomorrow, what he is going to say tomorrow, what kind of policy document he is going to sign tomorrow. And this is precisely the sign of weakness and decline, where you don't know what you want to do. China, in contrast, projects the image of a stable country and a predictable country. Mehbubani also says that single-handedly Trump has actually helped China by pulling out America from Trans-Pacific Partnership. Mehbubani says that this was actually a golden chance for America to keep its high stakes in the Asia-Pacific region and also benefit economically. But instead of doing that, it has handed over this entire alliance, Trans-Pacific Partnership, into the hands of China and actually strengthen China further. Same thing is true for Asian Investment Bank, Infrastructure Investment Bank, where also Mehbubani feels that America has blundered completely and helped China grow further in terms of its economic, commercial, and financial transactions. Mehbubani talks about the GDP also, and he says that in PPP, in purchase power parity terms, China has today larger GDP than America. Now, these statistics need to be actually confirmed. Sunil Bhai is the best person to really analyze them. But Mehbubani says that today, China's GDP in terms of purchase power parity is more than America's GDP. And this is the first sign of what is likely to come. And that is Chinese economy surpassing American economy in few years' time. Mehbubani also says that one mistake that America has committed is demonization of China. I mean, the continuous propaganda of depicting China as an evil empire, as an evil power, and America as the epitome of liberal virtues of human rights and democracy and so on, is actually going to embolden China more, and it is going to bring around greater support of Chinese population for the Jinping regime. Because China is no longer the old communist China. Today it is a nationalist China, and it takes its own criticism and demonization too seriously. So this is also, according to Mehbubani, a tactically wrong move to engage in this propaganda which demonizes China as an evil empire. Then, of course, what Sunil Bhai has referred to, Mehbubani says that America is paying a heavy cost for its needless interventions everywhere, and that is leaving little resource at the disposal of America to invest in fighting China. All the needless interventions in Middle East, military interventions, political interventions, have cost America heavily, and today it is facing a resource crunch where it will not be able to really invest enough resources in building up the power resources. Against that, China has been fairly stable. I mean, it has not engaged in this kind of reckless interventions abroad and saved its own resources and invested them in the most effective channels so that it can fight America better. And also, Mehbubani says that America is wrong in trying to bring about internal reform in China. Mehbubani says that it is not America's business at all to dictate to China what type of political system it should have. And he is very blunt about it. He says, Americans, you have only 250 years of history, and you are dictating to a country which has continuous history of 4,000 years. It has its own civilization, it has its own philosophical heritage. And how can you dictate to the Chinese people that they must have democracy and they must respect human rights and they must have this type of constitution? He says this is going to backfire badly. And not only with respect to China, America should stop dictating with respect to domestic political systems of any country. And this is actually going to be one of the reasons for the undoing of the supremacy of United States. Mehbubani then talks about the comparison of Soviet Union and China. He says America is making a big mistake by conceiving Chinese threat in the same manner as the Soviet threat. And Mehbubani is very clear. He says China is not the old Soviet Union. You cannot tackle China exactly in the same way you tackled Soviet Union, and America seems to be doing the same thing, using the same strategies that it used with respect to Soviet Union. Why is he saying that? Yes, his clear argument to say. He says Soviet Union was engaged in exporting ideology. Its avowed objective was to make as many countries communist as possible. China is not into ideological propaganda or ideological propagation. It is not interested in converting any other country to communism. It doesn't want to invest its resources on ideological campaigns outside its territory. Secondly, Mehbubani says that Soviet economy and Chinese economy are incomparable. Soviet economy was much weaker and therefore America could fight with Soviet Union easily. Chinese economy is very strong. Rather, Mehbubani warns that trade sanctions actually would boomerang against America. He says that they are likely to harm America more than China. He says it's impossible for America to decouple from China, and it can decouple from China provided it is ready to harm its own economy and weaken its own economy further, because China is so heavily involved with the economies of all the countries of the world. Now, this statistics needs to be confirmed. Mehbubani mentioned not in the book, but in one of his interviews, that more than 150 countries in the world today have greater trade with China than with United States. So he says if you are imposing sanctions against China, actually you are ensuring that even these 150 countries would trade less with America and they would trade more with China. And in the process, it would further weaken American economy. Mehbubani also says that unlike Soviet Union, China has not declared that its goal is to bring the American empire to an end. China has not conceived this war in the same way that Cold War was conceived by Soviet Union. It has never said that for us America is an enemy and we want to defeat America or finish America. And this is again a key difference in the strategies of the two countries. And another point that Mehbubani makes is that China has invested heavily in soft power resources, unlike Soviet Union, which was comparatively weak with respect to its soft power resources. China has today penetrated widely into various sectors to increase its soft power, and this is going to prove very difficult for America to really take on China based on its soft power. And lastly, it says that Soviet Union was never a national state. It never had any nationalist glue. China is not a communist state. And again, Mehbubani makes this remark. He says Chinese Communist Party is a misnomer. This is not a communist party at all. He says it's a Chinese civilizational party, CCP. It's a party which is wedded to China, Chinese nationalism and Chinese interest. It doesn't care for communism anymore. And this is the key difference. Nationalism is a strong source of power for China, unlike in the Soviet Union, which lacked any kind of nationalist fervor because of the disparate nature, the conglomerate of the 15 various nationalities that it collected under the umbrella of USSR. So Mehbubani is advising United States to ensure that its domestic economy is put in proper shape. And most importantly, it is arguing that, 5 more minutes, Sunil bhai? Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead. Yeah, please go
Sure.
ahead.
So it is advising the US that invest more on the welfare of your own citizens rather than trying to invest in needless external adventures or trying to fight trade war with China and in the process further weakening your economy. And he cites a statistic here that during the last 30 years, the standard of living of the bottom 50% of American people has actually gone down. And against that, the standard of living of the bottom 50% of China has gone up. And he says this is actually telling us where the societies of the two countries are today. America is no longer a hunky dory place where everything is fine. Its own population is facing severe stress in terms of unemployment, incomes, and everything. So he's clearly advising America to give up this option of fighting headlong with China in terms of a trade war or a strategic war and focus more on its domestic, economic, political, and social systems so as to gain the required legitimacy to continue as a superpower. And then he comes to the discussion of China. And he says China's biggest source of power is its demography. Its population is 4 times the size of United States. And no American company can ignore this huge market. In fact, even after trade sanctions, several American companies said that we want to continue trading with China and don't deprive us of our profitability. US is only 250 years old. He says China is more than 4,000 years old as a civilization. US against vis-a-vis US, I mean, China has the advantage of a more meritocratic government. Now, Mehbubani says that America today suffers from a crisis of merit. Mehbubani says that America's foreign service today lacks the same talent, the same merit that it had earlier during the Cold War. Against that, as a career diplomat, he says that I have observed that China employs the best minds in its policy making, in its technology sector, and its diplomatic sector. And they are more motivated, they are more proactive, they are committed to achieve a particular goal on behalf of China. Unlike the US diplomats and the US policymakers who seem to be little laid back and less meritorious. So China is also enjoying these advantages with respect to US apart from the larger advantage that it has in terms of economy and the soft power. Then he says that the 4 attributes of China and its strategic policy during the last 3 decades, they also indicate that how focused China is on achieving its goal to emerge as a superpower in a short period of time, maybe another decade or 20 years maximum. He says China's rise has been peaceful. Unlike America, which has rampantly used militarism as a strategy, China has not attacked any country during the last 3 decades. And China's rise is one of the most miraculous cases of peaceful rise of a great power. All great powers have risen through wars. China has risen as a great power not through war, not through military adventures, but through investment in economy, technology, education, and other sectors. Secondly, he says China has used multilateralism and multilateral forums as a major source of its rise as a great power. And against that, America is actually withdrawing from multilateralism. It is taking so many decisions which are unilateral. It is appearing to be against even United Nations at times, the largest multilateral forum that we have. And on top of it, it has actually handed over many of the multilateral institutions in the world to Chinese influence. So multilateralism is another important factor which marks China out, and it is using this strategy to emerge as a great power against the United States, which is actually disregarding the imperatives of multilateralism. Thirdly, consolidation of neighborhood and Eurasian continent. It says China has invested wisely and heavily into its neighborhood, settled the differences with most of its neighbors, except India, I mean, which is the only country which remains with respect to the settlement of its dispute, and through Shanghai Cooperation Organization and through the Belt and Road Initiative. It has created a large sphere of influence for carrying out its future strategic and economic projects. And lastly, it says that China has not fallen into the trap of unlimited military expenditure. America today has nearly 6,500 bombs, nuclear bombs. China has only 280. Mehbubani says that this is fine. China doesn't want to make more bombs because it says that 280 are enough for us to finish America. And we don't want to get into the nuclear arms race that Soviet Union pursued and unnecessarily divert our resources into military. On the domestic aspect, briefly, because the time is running out, let me tell you that according to Mehbubani, the present regime of Jinping is the best that China ever had. Mehbubani says that China is going through its best period in its history. It was never as powerful as it is now. And it is in the interest of the world that Jinping regime continues further. Because if Jinping falls, it is possible that this steady and well thought out strategic policy that has been worked out in China may falter. And here he is saying that the 10 years of Hu Jintao regime in China were very poor. I mean, he just cites that the leader who preceded Jinping was a very poor leader. And 10 years in China were really not the years of clarity. But Jinping is a clear headed leader, and he promises actually that China would rise in a steady and peaceful way further. He also says that all this talk about China not being democracy and people are being quite restless and repressed, he says this is not evidentially supported. He argues that 140 million people every year travel outside China. And he says that all of them come back to China. If they were repressed souls, if they were being terrorized by an authoritarian government in China, he is arguing that many of them would not like to come back. They would stay back in the Western countries where they are traveling. But he says this is not the case. The students also come back, businessmen come back, travelers also come back. So this repeated propaganda that China is terrorizing its population needs to be supported evidentially. And so far, there is no evidence that there is some kind of a situation of internal revolt within China. So China also enjoys a certain degree of domestic stability, he says, and it would be wrong to presume that China is about to fall like Soviet Union. He only suggests that China needs to work further on business environment. He says that still there are lots of issues for businesses to operate in China, and this would come in the way. So he's advising that China needs to put in order its judicial system, its local government systems, and ensure that contractual obligations are appropriately implemented, suitably protected. Then it would be better for China in terms of its further economic growth and expansion. Another advice he wants to give to China is that the militarization of South China Sea, that strategy needs to be rethought because this would be something like a brinkmanship, and China would remain unnecessarily preoccupied with military brinkmanship in South China Sea if it pursues this aggressive design of militarizing the islands and the waters of the South China Sea. So, all in all, these are some of the major points that Mehbubani is making. What is the conclusion? Has China won? Mehbubani is a diplomat. You see, diplomats never give an answer. They only raise questions. He doesn't say yes or no. He says future will tell. It depends upon America. He says whether China will win will not depend upon what China is going to do. It will depend upon how foolish America is going to stay. If America doesn't bend its ways, China's victory seems to be certain. I mean, nothing can stop China's victory if America continues with the same set of policies. But also he says that ultimately who wins is not important, China or America. It is important that human race ultimately wins in terms of its long-term goals. The book is actually very interesting for, as I said, all those who are interested in China, in America, in global affairs. Mehbubani has also discussed briefly about Australia, India, ASEAN, European Union, and Russia, what their roles are going to be. I am not going into the details of it because we are short of time. But fundamentally, is arguing that national interest will drive their policies, nothing else. America cannot just marshal and command and whistle that all of you come with us and they will just walk along. It's not going to be like that. Every country will weigh its national interest and decide for itself whether they will go with China or with America. Criticism of the book is that yes, he is biased towards China. See, I mean, that's what the reviewers, the critics are saying, that he is giving all advices to America and he has, I mean, nothing really substantial to offer to China, as if everything is very good about China. And it's very obvious that he is less critical about China. Maybe you can take it as another view on China. See, everybody, in why do we argue that only those who are criticizing China are objective? That is what Mehbubani is saying, that my view is alternative view. Accept it. It's an Eastern view of China. So far, you have read only the Western views of China. The media is purveying only the Western view of China. And this is my Eastern view of China. From the vantage point of Singapore, I have seen China closely, and that is what I'm writing. And you read it and accept it. If you don't accept my advice, West is at the peril. He says, I have nothing to lose. East has nothing to lose. West has everything to lose if you ignore our advice. So, I mean, despite the fact that it is biased in favor of China and highly critical of America, definitely I would say that it's an interesting read. One may buy the arguments, one may not agree with some of these arguments and conclusions that Mehbubani has drawn, but definitely he has sensitized us to probably the most interesting, the most debating, and possibly the most threatening competition, if not conflict, that is developing in the world, and that is the conflict or competition between United States and China for control of the global affairs over the next 2-3 decades to come. Thank you very much, Sunil Bhai, and I look forward to further questions, interventions, and comments from you as well as from our distinguished participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amit Bhai. As expected, very succinct, very lucid, very fluid explanations with the entire rationale of the book, and the way in which the 10 aspects and features the author has dealt with in the book. You have spelt out very well, easy to understand, easy to fathom, and even more importantly, how to digest and carry home thought for the watchers today. Let me add one thing. You just remarked about whether Chinese economy in terms of purchasing power parity has overtaken US or not. Yes, definitely. In fact, it has overtaken since 2015. That is number one. Number two, you also mentioned in your closing remarks that while nearly 140 million Chinese go out of China for visits and studies and all, hardly anyone lives back in those countries and comes back. Let me give you the very important statistics. According to the recent survey of all the major countries, China's current regime and current governance has the maximum approval. 72% of the population feel it is actually achhe din, in that country. It is the highest in the country. Any other country cannot match that figure. That speaks of, the approval of, the current regime. The other important aspect is that 800 million people have been lifted out of poverty, which has never happened in human civilization ever before. So, of course, admittedly, there is some slant of Eastern bias in the book. I can understand. We have been very well versed with the Western bias about, the China. Now, let me start with the spicy question to you, Professor. Of course, I'll deal with the questions which are there in the question book. But my question to you is, what is your Indian view on China? Indian view. Western view, Eastern view, we are already aware. Eastern view you have given. Western view, we are already aware. Now, let me know what is the Indian view of China?
Well, let me say that many of the things that Mehbubani has written for America and its approach and policy towards China, I mean, by extension, probably the same arguments could also be applied to Indian view and Indian approach to China. Possibly, I think the Indian approach has been quite historical, as we have been witnessing on and off. I mean, our politicians and even our serious functionaries. Not that it's only the some of the riffraff elements, but even some of the senior functionaries asking for boycott of China, boycott of everything that is Chinese. And suddenly, after 4 months, we celebrate the Chinese investments. We go to Wuhan. We invite Jinping to Mahabalipuram, go overboard to actually lay out red carpet. There is a considerable policy confusion. And what Mehbubani says with respect to America, that by decoupling with Chinese economy, America is going to harm itself. Probably my hunch is the same, that if India pursues this policy of disengaging from China economically, probably China has less to lose, America has more, India has more to lose. So we also need to have a more calibrated approach towards China in terms of our, particularly the neighborhood policy, because we need to realize that India's biggest Achilles heel today is its neighborhood. Virtually no reliable ally left in our neighborhood. They are closer to China than us. So in this scenario, we need a more calibrated, a more long-term, more studied approach to China rather than knee-jerk approach, and definitely not an approach which is aimed at winning votes in elections. China-India policy should not be subjected, and even China-India-Pakistan policy should not be subjected to electoral considerations, which often happens, I mean, in our country. One of the saddest parts of our democracy. Thank you, Sunil.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. I individually agree with your view, but it seems more individualistic view than the majority Indian view. But be that as it may, let me also tell you one thing. We must take into account one important fact, that China, by civilization and by meritocracy dependence, is strategic and systemic in all aspects of his life.
Yes.
Whereas we have shown tendency in recent years that we are strategic only sporadic and intermittent and spasmic. We are more emotive, and we are doing a lot of showboating and a lot of rhetorics. I think that is something which should go out of the element of foreign policy. Anyway, we are going to have a discussion on that in conversation next month.
Yes.
From symmetry to standoff. In fact, wait for important announcement. The watchers today, we'll have that aspect dealt with more closely next month. But now let me begin with the questions which have been posed and put up in the box. This one is from Siddharth. How India is successful in turning our neighbors against us? How China is successful in turning our neighbors against us? And is it the money power or something else that India lacks in policy? I think something that you addressed, but you can please reply.
Yeah, well, it's not a simple question, and there is certainly not a simple answer to this question. Yes, money is one major factor because China has bag full of money now, and it does invest in the well-being of its allies. The way United States used to invest in the well-being of its allies during the early period of the Cold War. So Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, to an extent even Bangladesh, and now Iran, they have been huge beneficiaries of Chinese munificence. India doesn't have the same kind of money. I mean, that's very simple. Secondly, also the diplomatic approach. It's not only money. It's a strategic diplomatic approach that Sunil Bhai talked about. We are accusing Nepalese president of being a victim of honey trap. I mean, this is the tracest kind of response that can come from typically Indian intelligence. If he doesn't want to see the writing on the wall. But that is how we actually sometimes consider our strategic options. But it's a serious issue because Central Asia is another area which is likely to go under the influence of China soon.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, India will have probably no ally in the neighborhood. Even Bhutan itself is actually dilly-dallying, kind of thinking here and there. No reservations about going with China. Now, in that scenario, we would really be in a very bad shape, and we would be forced into American umbrella. So the biggest danger I see is that America should not end up becoming a satellite state of America, just in this historical enthusiasm to fight China. And that is
Right.
what is happening. लोग कहते हैं कि नहीं अमेरिका है ना चिंता क्यों करते हैं हमारे साथ तो ट्रम्प है और
Okay,
ट्रम्प
yeah.
चाइना से हमें बचा लेगा अरे भी वो सबसे ज्यादा ट्रैप है
Okay.
नेहरू ने जो भी हमारे लिए इतना सारा काम करके नॉन अलाइनमेंट और एक इंडिपेंडेंट फॉरेन पॉलिसी मेकिंग का स्पेस खड़ा किया था आई एम अफ्रेड आर वी गोइंग टू लूज इट इन द नेक्स्ट 10 years just by becoming falling into American lab and then celebrating that also as one of the greatest foreign policy achievement कि देखो अमेरिका से हम ये छोटा बहुत कुछ ब्रॉडबैंड लगा देगा फेसबुक वाले या गूगल हमारे रेलवे स्टेशन पर इंटरनेट लगा देगा हमें बहुत खुशी होती है कि देखो इंडिया की फॉरेन पॉलिसी कितनी बड़ी विक्टरी है कि 200 रेलवे स्टेशन पर गूगल ने फ्री वाईफाई लगा दिया दिस इज नॉट द वे यू एक्चुअली formulate and present foreign policy successes.
Yeah, thank
Is
you.
something more hardcore. Yes, next question.
Thank you, Professor Dholakia. I never realized that you could be so outspoken and so forthright. Thumbs up on that. So anyway, the next question is from Anil Gupta. I mean, of course, a lot of it has been already covered by Professor in the review itself, but still, his question is that what is the root cause for slide of US and rise of China, and what about the boom in manufacturing sector? What are the other factors of China's unexpected growth, apart from, only the economics and, the manufacturing growth? What is your take on this?
Yeah, I think that's in one statement, one sentence, if I can say that according to Mehbooba, the root cause of American decline and Chinese resurgence has been that America has invested its resources in wrong sectors. That is in needless foreign interventions, military interventions, which have actually drained resources from its domestic sector in the welfare of the American population. Against that, China has been restrained militarily. The message is that Chinese military restraint has paid it well. America's military recklessness has caused decline. And in present century, Mehbooba says that military power is definitely not the most effective power when it comes to achieving your strategic objectives. And China has planned for it well in advance. And also the long-term strategy, that is what he is arguing, that China's strategy is robust. America has virtually no strategy and no long-term plan. It is slightly exaggerated statement from Mehbooba, but that is what he is saying, that America has no long-term plan and it is just acting in a knee-jerk way without any proper thought process being invested in the various policy options.
Right. If I may just put an additional remark to that, the last 10 years, the technological advancement has made it now possible to win the war, not the physical ones, and not by, fighting on land or in the air, but through the technology and through the cyberspace. And that is where, the military spend, which America has done, in recent years, may be out of proportion with, the true requirement of the modern times. So that is what it is. But having said that, China has stepped up the military spend considerably in last 7 years. It used to be something like $60 billion per year. Now it has reached $280 billion per year. But that is on the back of, having a huge size of economy, and which is still considerably less than what USA spends, their budget. Okay, the next question is from Niket. Again, he's asking, is boycotting China an ill-advised move?
Absolutely, because what can you boycott? Should we boycott our mobile networks? Should we boycott our cell phones? Should we abandon our power plants? Should we abandon many of our industrial and manufacturing processes? Should we stop buying medicines? Everything has China. The most recent 2-3 days back, government of India permitted one of the biggest orders for the purchase of pharmaceutical raw materials from China.
Yes.
Even after this Atmanirbharta package and the boycott China campaign, it's the economic logic that works, you see. Whatever is cheaper will sell. And nobody is going to buy a good that is available in 100 rupees in China by paying 150 rupees or 130 rupees to Europe or an American company. So it's easier said than done. Boycott of China is more a populist slogan meant for a certain nationalist sentiment. I mean, that's necessary. I'm not denying it. During a period of tension, arousing nationalist sentiments are necessary, but these are not really pragmatic policy prescriptions. They
Right.
have their short-term value.
Right.
Then they are replaced by other options.
Right. Thank you, Professor. The next question is from Payal. I think she is questioning whether China's current rise, astonishing as it is sustainable. And in the light of the fact that there is a current trend in the world going on about moving the sourcing away from China across several manufacturing and sourcing hubs. Given the global trend which has started now from moving away their manufacturing base from China, will the China's economic power be sustainable? That's the question.
Well, only thing that can really stop China and in the tracks is a total unity among all the major 15, 20 countries of the world that matter today, economically and politically. If America changes its orientation and is able to, is successful actually, in convincing the major powers of the world, including the regional powers and players, to form a wide-ranging alliance and isolate China economically almost completely. But Mehbubani, in his book, argues that this is going to be impossible. He says even Australia, believed to be one of the closest American allies, may not completely go along with America when it comes to economic aspects. You see, because Australian economy is so heavily connected with China's. The only country that may actually follow America is Japan, in true sense. European Union will not follow. Australia will not follow. India also has its own constraints. So how do you isolate and boycott China globally as America wants to do that? It's going to be difficult diplomatically to create that kind of an alliance against China.
Professor, if I may add here, as far as Australia is concerned, let me tell you that Prime Minister Scott Morrison, in fact, is very belligerent, Donald Trump, in fact. He is very aggressive. And, in fact, he has made scathing remarks about China. So I think Australia is putting all its hope behind the US in the pursuit of, isolating China. But having said that, China has now reached a stage and the size of economy whereby, just like India, it can have a huge domestic consumption base to sustain its economy. So its reliance on export of physical goods and to some extent services has come down substantially in last 10 years. And it has built up the technology might, which will see them run through, their current spell of economic success in the foreseeable future. So that's what I would like to add here. There is another question from Tailap Shah. Nice said about strategy and its reference to, cool-headedness. Think same applies to our current state of relationship with China and handling Chinese aggression in Galwan Valley. I mean, he says, can we be cool and strategic in handling our Galwan Valley? If I understood the implicit implicit meaning of the question, Professor.
Well, I hope so, because developments are underway. It would be really premature to have a final statement about Galwan, its causes and consequences. But I am hopeful, and I am sure that it is the cool-headed logic and strategy that is at work between the negotiators of the two countries with respect to Galwan. As a patriotic Indian, I do hope so, and I wish that India's interests, territorial interests, are fully protected and restored with respect to the line of actual control. And I wish so and I hope so.
Right. The next question is, from Rupesh, Australia. It is something to do with, this book was written before COVID and now the COVID is changing the equation worldwide. So since it is on COVID, let me read this or recite this pankti in Hindi about COVID. Well, दुनिया तो कुछ जमाने से थी और कुछ कुछ फासला बढ़ता हुआ अब नजर आ गया ये तो कम वक्त कोविड ने आके इल्जाम अपने पे ले लिया. So with that remark, let me tell you what is the question. Even though it is published now, this book is written with introduction, with information from pre-COVID era. COVID has certainly shifted the goalpost slightly. I agree that we may not have a single superpower. This is the observation of Rupesh, which I also agree with. And a region-based power structure will be new norm for post-COVID world. That means he is talking about multipolar scenario in the years to come, which Professor you also talked about. But anyway, I think please take the question and the remarks.
Well, I think it's very risky to make predictions about post-COVID world. Even we are not able to make predictions about COVID itself, where we were headed and where we would be after 6 months or a year, after a year. So I would say let's wait, because as of now, all countries are engaged in fighting the domestic health crisis, whether it's America or India or even European countries. Once they are out of this crisis management, and once the normalcy is restored, and after the American elections only, because a lot depends upon who wins the November 2020 presidential elections in US. So till that time, I think it is risky to really make any predictions with respect to the nature of the global order post-COVID. It could be what it is now, or it could turn out to be an alliance against China. But as I said, it will require a lot of effort on the part of America to create that broad-based alliance against China. And Trump doesn't have that kind of ability, certainly. If a more mature leader takes over in White House, possibly he will have more acceptability among the allies of United States and other countries to convince them to create that kind of an alliance, and also to head for a more multipolar and regionally oriented global order. Yes,
right. Thank you. The next question is from Abhimanyu. There are at least 6-7 questions in the waiting. I'll try to accommodate as many as possible. Abhimanyu has a question come observation. While the US might not have reliable allies at the moment, China seems to be gaining reliable adversaries in Australia, India, Britain, Japan, even Russia. I don't agree with Russia being an adversary. In fact, Russia and China are coming closer to each other than ever before. But anyway, as an extension of that, is it advances claims on Vladivostok? Yeah, it's about that particular city in the eastern region of Russia, Vladivostok. Even Hawaii is affected not only in Britain but in several nations of the Europe. So while China may emerge above the US, is it possible that even China may not end up as a superpower anytime soon?
possible. It's possible. As I said, what the future scenario is going to be, it could be a committee of major powers, controlling the global affairs, and not just one country. And actually, it is good. I wish that there is no superpower in the world. This superpowerism itself is a very dangerous concept. And definitely for India, it would do well if neither America nor China are number one. And it's actually a group of major countries which are collectively controlling the global affairs. And it's theoretically possible. It has happened in Europe earlier also during the 18th century and so on, where there was no single country which dominated, but a group of countries which dominated. So for India, actually the best bet is multipolar. That let there be a group of countries, and that will give us a lot of maneuvering power to protect our own national interests.
Yeah. Payal's next question is already covered in the form of the post-COVID scenario. So I'm skipping that. I'm taking the question from Sardul Bhatt. Dr. Dholakia, unfortunately, the present political leadership is not receptive to Mehbooba's advice. I think he refers to probably US. Future presidential candidates lack character, will and vision to and vision to take this country forward. This means US, and so China is definitely has a upper hand as of now. That's an observation. Would you like to take anything, or I can go to the next question, Professor? Hello. 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 I think Professor's connectivity has gone off, it seems. So I'll try to answer these questions. Everybody in all strata, intellectual to the humble hourly wage worker, those few who still have a job, hate POTUS. I don't know what does that mean. The next question is from Samir Parikh. Mankind always loves freedom, freedom of expression and freedom of faith as a fundamental aspect of freedom. China's success story is devoid of this freedom, and hence, sooner or later, it will collapse on its own weight. Well, I think this is an ideology-driven question. Partly, I'll just explain and answer to something which I remarked a few minutes back. The recent survey of well-being of people and feeling good, China has topped with highest rating of 72% over every other country, including whole of Europe and United States. So, I mean, that partly explains that the population of China presently is quite comfortable with the way the company's affairs are steered, the way the country's affairs are steered. They seem to be comfortable with the present, but as in future, anything can happen. The next question is from Saurabh Vakil. It is the populace that loves him and brought him to power? That is still a matter of concern. I think, again, ideology driven or something like that. I meant POTUS. I don't understand what is POTUS. Sorry. So I have to give a go.
United States.
Okay, President of the United States. So Professor has come back live. Professor, you can
there was a connection error.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I think it's more of an observation because, but I mean, Trump has proven to be probably the most, I would say, risky bet for America in terms of its foreign policy. And single-handedly, actually, he has ended up creating a lot of challenges, not just domestically, but also in the external sector. If he continues for 4 more years, I mean, it's unthinkable.
For the whole world, not only for China, for the whole world. Yeah, correct. Thank you. Next one is complimentary. There are a lot of accolades and admirations for the wonderful presentation. This one, of course, is a question which probably you have covered in the last part of the presentation, but nevertheless, let me read out. This one is from Jai Kumar, Chennai. Has the author discussed any weakness of China, like he mentioned quite a few weakness of US in China-US context? I think he did mention about China's weakness, which you covered up. But if you want to take a question, please quickly.
Yeah, as I said, weaknesses, yes. Again, I'm repeating the same thing. He says Chinese judicial system needs to be improved. Local government systems need to be improved. China needs to create more healthy business environment. He says Chinese companies, when they go out, get more concessions than the Chinese companies when they operate within China, and this could be a big drag. Next, he says avoid military South China Sea because this could prove to be an undoing. And China had given a commitment to the world that we will not militarize South China Sea, and it has reneged on this commitment. And Mehbooba says this is not good for an emerging great power and a superpower that it reneges on its commitments. So these are some of the, but you are right that Mehbooban is soft on China. He says, okay, China to theek hai, sab kuch acha hai. It's America which needs to be really, it needs to change its own course.
Right. The next one question, and the filling is what I told you. The majority Indian filling. Doctor Professor. So be prepared for that. This is Mehboobani's version. This is from Ashok Luktuke. We see China as our enemy. I think our means India's enemy, and want to protect our country from Chinese hegemony. China is not transparent, hence to say it has a successful rise of power is wrong. Chinese invest not to help other countries, but total benefit for itself. So this is the observation of this gentleman. Yeah. Then next one again, it is only praise of China and not real criticism. That is the grouse expressed by this particular member. Then again, Payal Hindocha. Of course, I'll be able to take only now next 2-3 because there are too many questions. Payal, I'll have to give a go-by to your question because I've dealt with your questions twice before. And then this is Ranjita Chakrabarti. What she says is that true leadership matters. If any one of them is replaced, then things may take a different turn. Second is, if at all possible, to conceptualize the drama in today's world with two actors. There are multiple alternatives that may emerge due to multiple strategic alliances between the other states. I think probably what she says is something corroborating what you said, multipolar world or something like that. But if you want to add your comment, you're most welcome to do that.
No, I think that is already covered. It's basically, I think, a reference to the possibility of a multipolar world order suiting India's interest rather than a drama of one or two actors.
And the next one is from Samir Parikh again. Very staunch nationalist. The author seems to be flattering China for some personal motive, which we do not know, but it looks heavily one-sided. But let me tell you, Kishore Mehboobani is Indian origin. Though he's born and brought up in Singapore, he's an Indian origin. He's not a Chinese. Professor, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think, yeah. I take it as an observation.
Yeah, it's an observation, but well taken.
Well taken. There is a bias, no doubt about it. He is biased. It's very clear. He is biased.
There is a bias. Okay.
And there could be any reason for this bias. I mean, because as I said, Chinese soft power is spreading. So this is one evidence of Chinese soft power. There an American publisher publishes this book in America itself, and there is a Singaporean book writing about.
Samir is muted here, so he can't express. Otherwise, he will say that Sunil bhai, you have a lot of bias, and you express that bias in esoterica. Anyway, on a lighter note, Saurabh Vakil, I believe the author does not aim to compare strengths and weaknesses of America versus China. His aim, I think, like Professor Dholakia said, to advise US about how they need to shape up. In the process, if he seems to praise China, I would like that as knowing the enemy better and not as one being superior versus one. Very well explained. I think this is a very good observation, isn't it, Professor?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. Then this is from Harit Kumar Dave. Sir, you have aptly replaced Sri Mayank Dholakia. Oh, this is complimentary. As one of the academic stars in BBB Club. Do you think Chinese authoritative administration will ultimately lose its control? When you have referred to Mayank Dholakia, let me tell you, Mayank Dholakia, in August 1998, some 20 years back, made the first maiden review at this forum in my office, in small office. And the name of the book was Vision 2020. And now today it is 2020. This was the book he reviewed 22 years back. Good to have reminded My
Our
homage
tribute
and
to
my,
him.
remembrance to Mayank Dolakia. He was one of the pioneers of this forum. Thank you. Vikas Vaze, my question. Do you think Chinese authoritative administration will ultimately lose its control? Yeah, this is a very good question, Professor. How long the Xi Jinping and the company will last, meaning the Communist Party, Central Communist Party. This is a very important question
This is an
for the
important
whole
question.
world.
And, even Mehbubani writes that the top in China, in Chinese political system, remains very secretive. He says nobody is able to break through the curtain that surrounds the highest level of decision making by the Communist Party of China in terms of choice of leadership and also the transitions of leadership. If
Right.
post-COVID, the world turns against China, and one of the biggest gambles that Jinping has played is Belt and Road Initiative because it's trillions and trillions of dollars of investment of China. Now, if that fails, uh, definitely Jinping's acceptability within Communist Party would go down. So Jinping needs to ensure that BRI succeeds, Belt and Road Initiative, and post-COVID scenario doesn't turn against China. Otherwise, definitely his leadership will come in for a lot of questioning. And
Yeah.
Chinese are known for commitment to their country, not to an individual. They can
That's
do away with Jinping and get somebody else to head the country.
correct. Very true. Next question from Vikas. Quickly, you can take. How does this impact India and developing policies or developing nations like us? I mean, what is the lesson for developing nations in India? Something like that, from China's current rise. Okay, and then yeah, please go
Lessons
ahead.
are, I think, invest in technology, invest in economy, invest in education. China's turnaround has been because of these three principal sources of power: economy, technology, and education, supported by soft power. So if we want to grow, let's wait. No country becomes a great power in a span of few years. China took 3 decades to reach where it is today. If we plan from today, if we start from today, maybe by 2050, our turn will also come. हमारा भी दिन
Yeah.
आएगा.
Professor, can I add one liner here?
Yes.
Be systematic, be strategic, and less transactional, especially our leadership. Okay, I think that's my take. Anyway, Pradeep Pofali has given a very nice suggestion that there is a recent interview of Singapore PM Li Liang at World Economic Forum, in which he has talked about China and USA. Yes, those of you who are interested, please. I regard that current Singapore Prime Minister, along with our Indian origin senior minister, as among the foremost thinkers, Shanmuga Ratnam, Tharman Shanmuga Ratnam.
Yes.
Please listen to their views and their speeches whenever you get time. I highly recommend. Anyway,
Yes.
next question is from Shashi Shekhar. Hi, Shashi from Bangalore. Has the author addressed the trust deficit that China is currently burdened with?
No.
He has not addressed that
Yes.
question.
Any of this bigger aspects of that.
Lot of opposition worldwide is building up against China.
Right.
Yeah. That is true. Yeah, I think he has not, because I think he has written this book in 2019 and he has not taken.
No,
I think he has not covered those aspects.
Yeah. Maybe the book got completed in 2019 and got published in March, April 2020. So just little before the COVID spread happened.
Right. I think very interesting. This. Right. So I think we are almost coming to an end of the questions. Rest of the remarks are more of comments. This Samir is putting one last question probably. I don't think Indian Prime Minister has ever talked about economic disengagement from China. Policies are being tweaked to tame cunning China, but not to disregard economic power of China. Ignore foot soldiers. It is Indian democracy, so we come to know about foot soldiers, unlike China. I have never been to China, so I don't know, how many foot soldiers are there. But yes, in India we have many foot soldiers. I agree.
I agree with
Professor,
Samir bhai, and I
yeah.
hope that that is how it is. I mean, more calibrated policy approach rather than a blanket boycott of China kind of thing that sometimes seems to dominate the social media and the popular discourse.
No, but banning of 58 applications, was it social media decision or it is a government of India decision?
Yeah, and
So I
even
think
the
we need
BSNL,
to
I think
recheck.
they,
We need to recheck on that. Yeah, I think so.
even in the telecom
That's a
sector.
government. Yeah, it's a government of India decision. Yeah, and recently the Indian Railways have also taken Chinese
Right,
company out of the contract. So I think these are all decisions backed by government of India.
right,
I think they are not
absolutely.
social media decisions. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you, thank you, thank you. I think we are coming to an end. Oh my God, you know. Anyway, there is one question from Professor Sundar Rajan. I
Okay.
mean, your colleague, so how can I
Right.
ignore his comment and question?
Yes, sir.
Well, it is complimentary with observation, rich content and absorbing presentation, but in my humble view, for which I request your response. This is from Amit Dholakia. Professor to professor is always better, you know. The
Yeah.
book has
Thank
been
you, Professor.
the book has been overtaken by China's recent belligerence, which has altered which has alerted the entire world, and loose coalition has already been formed, which could exploit China's wards like HK, that is Hong Kong, the Uyghurs in Xinjiang province, and Tibet. Also, then the chips are down. It will not be US alone, but they will have to face NATO. And not to forget, Professor, India will also join, isn't it? Anyway, Professor Amit Dholakia, please respond.
Ah. Well, at the end, I would just like to thank everybody for rich comments, I would say, because this all the comments were quite rich in terms of the directions that they gave in terms of understanding our policies. And I have not been able to go through all the comments that have been posted in the chat box. But as Sunil Bhai said, there is a lot of appreciation. So let
Yeah.
me sincerely thank each and every participant uh, who has commented on and appreciated this particular presentation. I also thank particularly those participants who could join in from outside Vadodara. I could see there are
Oh,
distinguished
yeah.
participants from Bangalore, from Chennai, from West Bengal, from few other places. And this is indeed a
Ethiopia,
matter of great,
Australia, Phil-
Australia also, yes, it's a matter of great privilege
Ethiopia,
and
Philippines,
pleasure.
US, and UK.
Oh,
Anyway,
okay.
we
So it's
normally don't
Baroda
talk
book
about it.
browser is Baroda is also spending now. I think it's expanding its horizons.
Yeah,
Thanks to
hopefully.
you,
Yeah,
Sunil
thank you.
bhai. So
Thank you.
thank you
Thank you.
everybody.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. In fact, I would like to thank all the participants for
Hmm.
their huge response and, helping us getting used to this new normal of virtual meetings so
Hmm.
comfortably. You know, it is the
Hmm.
response, it's the participation, the quality of questions, and the
Yes.
encouragement, that has helped take to this new
Hmm.
initiative and migrate to this virtual meeting format seemingly uh, quite easily. So I
Hmm.
am very thankful, and of course, how can I not forget while concluding this meeting to thank Amit Bhai, very much for wonderful rendition, excellent narratives, uh, forthright explanations, and great command over the subject. Of course, that's your forte. And I hope we all have enjoyed this morning. Now it's 12:45. Time to go back to our dining rooms and be with family. Have a nice lunch. Continue to take care of yourself, your family. Stay healthy, stay fit. That's it. We'll meet again next month. Of course, in the Baroda book, we are going to meet twice. One will be a book review on 23rd of August, regular. But before that, on 16th August, we are planning in conversation panel discussion, something to do with symmetry diplomacy to stand up. The recent Sino-India conflict and its analysis. So stay tuned at that time. Right now, I wish you all good remainder of the day. Take care. Thank you all. And thank you for tuning in. All the best.
Thank you, Sunil. Thank you, Sunil. Pleasure.